Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my very special guest, Sam Baltrusis. And Sam, you with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. And once again, let everybody know how they can purchase your books. I know they're on Amazon.com, and let's give them a rundown about your books and where they can contact you as well.
Sure, yeah. My website's bostonhaunts.com. You can also type in Ghost of Boston or Ghost of Salem or Ghost of Cambridge. Kind of made it easy with the ghost of part. In Google, and you'll be able to find it.
Excellent. Awesome. And we have a question for you in the chat. Let's see here. Ask the guest what has been the most frightening thing that's happened to you in all of your research.
The most frightening thing. I think definitely the scratch marks when I was doing the tour in Salem, that really freaked me out. And it was near the Samuel Pickman House, and there's also the Joshua Ward House. So I can deal with like the apple rolling toward me because that's kind of passive. Mm-hmm. But when something physically happens to me, that's the part that terrifies me the most.
Right. Well, that sounds almost like a psychic attack, I would say, to some degree, right?
Yeah. I felt that very strongly in Salem. I felt like that there was, not necessarily they were against me, but, necessarily when I reached out to the Wiccan community in Salem, they didn't respond to me. Everybody else did. So I felt like they didn't want me to tell the story, which is the paranormal story of Salem. That's
weird. I wonder why. That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. And maybe it's because they feel like that it's theirs, but the ghost lore and history is pretty much up for grabs, and trying to get it correct is very important to me. So yeah, I didn't have a very strong response from Salem's Wiccan community, which I thought I would, but and truthfully, it's a paranormal book, so it's like the Wiccan history is not necessarily like the people that live there now and have their circles now. That's their thing. It really doesn't have anything to do with my book, but I did reach out to them, and they didn't respond to me.
That's interesting because that should be part of their background as well. And you'd think they would be more receptive to that. But, there are a lot of people who claim to be witches out there. I don't want to sound harsh, but I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of them who are amateurs, and there are not hardcore witches. Some of them practice what I call the BITCH craft instead of regular avatars and regular. And I'm trying not to be mean about this. There are wonderful people in the craft out there in all worlds, but I will tell you that I've noticed that too. And it's unfortunate to me that they have these attitudes because they're nothing. And the bottom line is we live in a very multifaceted world. Everybody's sensitive. Everybody's psychic. And if you understand how to tune into it, you don't need to do any real hardcore ritual to get to that destination. I can guarantee you that much. But that's kind of disappointing when I hear about things like that, when they're not cooperating or they're having attitudes. And this isn't the first time I've come across that. Believe me, I'm a practitioner of the craft, but I'm a very old, eclectic, alchemical, mystical scientist too, which I think I'm a very atypical when it comes to the covens and things like that. Very atypical, but very advanced in consciousness and sciences. And I certainly understand the dynamic behind a dimensional space. And I don't think a lot of these women do, and men, whatever they are.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not trying to sound mean to them because I have some really good friends out there in Salem too. But I will say I have noticed that as well. So.
Well, it's an industry in Salem, and you walk down the street, Essex Street, and you're going to see people. It's they're legitimate clairvoyants that are in Salem, and if people say, where do I go? I tell them where to go. Mm-hmm. But there's an industry there, and it's sort of a fear of that industry being affected. I think, because that's their bread and butter. And it wasn't like the book exposed anything, but I do think that I am very uncomfortable with sort of the ritualistic stuff that's happening with the paranormal world and kind of doing the circles to summon the dead. I think that left a very unsavory, there's a lot going on in Salem that that scared me. That really scared me.
Well, the funny thing is, and I understand where you're coming from because I don't think they really know what they're doing and what they're dealing with. I really don't think they get it. They get one little piece of the picture, but they don't get the whole multiversal picture. And I'm telling you, man, once you start diving into those dimensional spaces and you start dealing with these different types of species and beings, you better hold on for the ride. And I think a lot of those people are not prepared. I also believe that a lot of people are opening themselves up to be possessed. And that's not a good sign. And I see a lot of disembodied entity possession. I see a lot of people who are practicing magic who are not connected to their higher selves, their oversoul, their superconscious. That completely deflates ritual. If you're not connected to your higher self, oversoul, then you can't do a good ritual because you're just going to bring in disembodied units. It's an astral junkyard. But I do see that too. When you start putting money ahead of spirituality, I think that you're going to run into some problems, in my opinion. I mean, it becomes a circus and it becomes a dance, and everybody's a gypsy fortune teller, and they've lost that real mystical consciousness that's associated with respecting the elements, nature, and the spirit world. You know, it's not about summoning people who've transferred out. Why don't they just leave those beings alone and let them move on, first of all? You know, and I'll tell you one thing: spirits, if they want to contact you, they'll contact you, and you don't need to do a circle to do that. I mean, if they want to get, and you obviously know that. I mean, if they want to get in touch with you, believe me, they find ways. You don't need to do any big time ritual for that. So that's another thing also.
Yeah, and I feel like but it's more for the show of it, because like they'll do like a circle for the dead on Halloween. I actually stay away from Salem on Halloween, because I think that it's too much going on for me, and it's crowded. There's like thousands, possibly, up to like 1 million people crammed in Salem. So I'd stay away from Salem on actual Halloween, even though I've given tours there. But it's a freak show. It's like a freak show of like people kind of, and I'm all about educating people, but I don't think necessarily people go there for the education. I think they go there to be scared.
Yeah, I think they go there for that too, and also it's more like a party scene, in my opinion. I mean, that's just what it sounds like to me. That's too bad, really, because I'm used to doing ceremony and ritual where there's respect to those who have transferred out, and it's not about all this I don't know what you want to call it. I want to say propaganda to some degree, but things change, and once again, I think it has a lot to do with people not being educated to the level they need to be when they're starting to do this work. And of course, with Wicca and craft in general, there are a lot of people who are jumping on the bandwagon, and they think they know what they're doing, and I'm telling you they don't. And I just kind of observe it from afar, because I have a real extensive background in mysticism, but I see it. I do. And it's not just them, but I will say that when you're dealing with veils between worlds, especially around Samhain, what we call Samhain or Halloween, then you're going to be dealing with a lot of different energies. And of course, people open themselves up to those things and don't know how to handle that energetic signature. And it may not affect them for a year or two. And then all of a sudden, a ritual they did will backfire and blow up right on them, maybe 2 to 3 years later. And I've seen that happen too. So,
I can give you a perfect. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but there was a circle that was done on Halloween, and so there was a girl that was basically summoned, and she's stuck around. So the girl has been spotted in windows and is at a certain location in Salem. And this is from a circle that happened probably like 7 years ago.
Yeah, see, that's not right, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What's the point? Why are you trying to trap spirits? That's bad mojo, in my opinion. And once again, I think it's going to have a repercussion, because on a universal scale, things like that will blow up. I mean, there's something to be said about mystical work. It has to be done on a very high level, a very high alchemical level. But once again, it's an astral junkyard these days, and it's very disappointing to me to observe that, to be honest with you. But I still like Salem too, but I haven't been there forever. But I've encountered some really strange people in the craft also associated with that area, and they're very sketchy. They seem almost entity possessed. Excuse me, and they don't seem sincere. So I don't know. Maybe things need to change for that whole area, energetically speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's good too. It's not all bad, but I think that some of the things that are sort of considered to be normal is ethically against what I believe in.
Right. Well, I've been around enough to watch people in the craft, and I'll tell you, I've seen good and bad also. And there's good and bad everywhere, in every religion, every belief system. But I definitely have noticed it. And once again, it's the BITCH craft that they're practicing and not true. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. And I've seen it. And hey, they're into their egos. They're so into their egos. I'm not saying all of them are, but a lot of them are. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm very different. I'm just like so atypical. Probably like one of the original elder kind of consciousness beings, because I don't resonate with a lot of the crap that goes on these days.
Well,
for sure.
I mean, my thoughts are, like, especially when it comes to the craft, I think it's important for to do good, focus on light energy, but also everything that you put out comes back to you. So if you put out bad, it's going to come back to you, and God knows what it's going to be. It's like, it could be a demonic entity. Who knows what's going to come back to you.
Right. Well, the thing is, it will come back at least threefold, but I always say more than that, and a lot of these people are putting bad mojo out, and I'll tell you that point blank. I know they are, and you can't do that. You can't navigate just screwing people over energetically their whole life without having it hit you in the butt, because eventually it's going to do that. And it's not even just people in the craft. I mean, anybody can be psychically negative, and when you see people you encounter from day to day who are just plain mean people, and they're projecting negative energy, and they're constantly trying to bombard or send evil thoughts somebody's way, that's a form of a curse. So once again, think about that. on the linear scale, and then think about on a paranormal level. Oh my gosh, all the different energetics. That's not even dealing with the ones that have transferred out and the spirits and the ghosts and everything else, right?
Well, I mean, thinking of it, like if you look at 1692, a lot of what was happening back then, all the 19 innocents that were, because there were hundreds were being accused, and like horrible things were happening. Like the dungeon was horrific. But there was what was known as spectral evidence. So, I also, in my Ghost of Salem book, I talk about, perhaps the spectral evidence was in fact really paranormal activity that they were experiencing, and they kind of associated that with, with witchcraft or with evil. So, if you look at sort of the history of the documents associated with the spectral evidence, like they're saying that they saw so-and-so appear in their room. Maybe they did. Maybe they saw a ghost and they put a face to it and said, oh, that's Bridget Bishop. And so, I think that, so that's a downside. Like, you can kind of, like, sort of, the witch trials of 1692 should be a cautionary tale. They should be, and we should definitely not forget it, and we shouldn't forget the Holocaust, and we shouldn't forget all these horrible things that have happened in our history, and not capitalize on it, not turning it into a Disney World or, a place where, like, I feel guilty going to Salem and even giving a tour. I feel like I'm like educating people about the history of Salem, but I also feel like that it's turned into a bit of a carnival type atmosphere there as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's too bad. And well, you're doing a good service. I mean, because you are giving a historical background, and I appreciate that. And I know a lot of other listeners appreciate it as well, because people need to know a background. I mean, just like a place that's haunted, I mean, you have to know why the place is haunted. You have to know who lived there. You go back and you look at the historical records of who was there. I mean, I think it's fascinating, and it gives a little more of a solid landscape insofar as doing the research.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at the Boston Book Festival, and I had a mother come up to me, and she was all excited about getting my third book. And she said that she got with her daughter. Her daughter was a teenager, and her daughter was not really into history, but she would go to the different locations featured in my book, and she would read each section. And because of the ghost stories, her daughter was kind of like now getting excited and passionate about history, and that was like the best compliment I've ever heard. Like that someone actually use it as a teaching tool for their kids, because it's and the kids love the ghost stuff, and I hopefully I can kind of get them excited about the history as well.
Oh, I think that's wonderful, and also I think there should be a book out. Well, I think there should be a book out for children on the paranormal, so they understand the spirit world a little bit better. I don't know if there is one, to be honest with you, but go ahead.
No, I mean, I needed that when I was a kid.
I'm serious, because kids these days are being saturated with the paranormal. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there are many books out there dedicated for children to understand spirits, what the paranormal, what they're dealing with on an energetic level. I think that might help them, actually, to some degree, to know what's going on.
That's a good idea, because I think that, I always say it, it's like, the movie The Shining or the book The Shining by Stephen King. Like, that was me. I was kind of like the kid that was very, very attuned to what was going on when I was very young. And then I put on what I call paranormal blinders, because it was too scary for me. So I just, anything that happened, I would block it because it was just too traumatic. And then as I got older and more kind of like accepting of who I am, then I was able to kind of take off the blinders and kind of focus on telling their story. Now it's kind of like part of my life. Spirits are kind of the big part of my life, but I have to also make sure that I have a life outside of the spirit realm as well.
Right. I think it's actually good for you to be writing about this, because it's calibrating you to the next level, on a spiritual level. In my opinion, I think it is anyway. I think it's helping you out. And also, obviously, you just put your shields up and keep them up. But you have to kind of learn how to, I don't want to say toughen your skin, but you do. I mean, we all learn this on those of us who are on the path of mysticism in general, whatever we do, whether it's dealing with the paranormal or whatever realm, you have to kind of get calibrated and be able to handle a lot of different transmissions of energy. And whether some are not pleasant, and I understand that, that's where you deflect attacks. That's where you learn how to deflect these things so that you're not taking on more than you have to. And I'm not sure if you've done a lot of work on that level, but you might want to at some point take a look at, and I'm not saying the spirits will be attacking you. I'm saying people acting out through the spirit world will attack you. And be careful with that, because you have to keep those shields going.
That's what I think. I suspect I encountered in Salem as well.
Yeah, I know you did. I didn't want
Yeah,
to
I mean,
say
I
it,
don't
but
know.
I know it's what it is. So
Yeah, and I knew it too, and like I felt I knew that was happening, so I kept my distance from it. But you know, like getting back to sort of the negative, like I had a friend who passed away this past year, and I knew it before anybody else did. I just felt the energy, and so it's a gift and a curse. You know, like I feel like it's a God-given thing when you lose someone that you care about and you kind of feel it before everyone else knows. And you're like, how do you know that? And I just know. And I broke down in tears. I'm like, it's something that sometimes I don't want to know.
right. No, I understand that. And well, I think it's a good way. I know it's sad too, but at the same time, it's nice to know when they transfer because I think they are saying goodbye and there's a kind of a detachment going on an
Yeah.
etheric level. So that's almost, it is kind of a blessing too. I agree. But yeah, it can be sad.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. But they always say goodbye and they always connect in when they feel guided to. Summoning spirits and forcing them to be in somebody's place at a certain space in the illusion of time is not appropriate in my opinion. I mean, I just call it as I see it, but I just don't think so anyway. And I've never had to do that in the spiritual realms. Spirits come to me, but I've had plenty in other timelines too. So yeah, so that does happen. But I think your path is fascinating. I think it's pretty cool what you're up to, and you also now you're doing the ghost tours, right?
Right.
Okay, so how often do you do that?
Well, I mean, it actually starts in April. So, like, I thought that ghost tours would just be like a Halloween phenomenon, but truthfully, my ghost tours start April, May. So I have one in Cambridge, one in Boston, and I'm probably going to bring back Salem, but I'm not sure because I did do Salem before. It's just too much of a circus vibe to Salem, so I'm not sure if I'm going to bring back Salem. But yeah, I start the tours April and May, and then they go on all the way to kind of culminate in October.
Well, that sounds like fun. That sounds nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're a huge hit. I mean, like what the whole ghost tour business is a whole other world. Like it's really important for me to do when I do the ghost tours that I get the history correct because I think that the people actually come Boston has a ton of tourists. So people that visit Boston actually go on my tours to learn about the history. And of course the ghost stories are, fun too, but they want to know sort of like the history that you don't get from, like the propaganda or from, like the typical, Revolutionary War history. They want to know the darker history.
Right. And what I like about it also is the ancient buildings, the old architecture, which is really beautiful, to go in there and actually experience some of that and the vibration associated.
Old hotel, very haunted, definitely a hotbed. People say, like, what's the most haunted spot? And I would say the Parker House, mainly because it was that location is a lot happened during the Revolutionary War. It's kind of like that was the epicenter. That's where the Boston Massacre happened. So there's a lot of lingering energy there before it was even built. But yeah, the Parker House is definitely a major attraction. And then also and I do a tour in Cambridge. Harvard Yard is just like a hotbed of energy as well. When you walk into Harvard Yard, you can feel the energy. When you walk in the middle of the yard, it's like it's not necessarily. It's very positive, actually. It's a very comforting, but it's a strong energy when you walk in the middle of the yard.
And do you have paranormal dreams after you do all these types of walks?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and that's weird. I was actually just going to talk about that. If I do any work, a lot of it's in my dreams. So I definitely I use my dreams to kind of guide me. So the dreams have definitely been a very major player because I view dreams as the spirits talking in my dreams. So that's because I can handle that. And I think if I had a spirit walk up to me and like, "Hey Sam, how's it going?" I probably would flip out. But I'm able to deal with it with my dream work.
Well, that's good. So what's your impression of the old hag that everybody talks about?
The old hag.
You ever had any experiences like that with something like that?
You mean like sort of like the stereotypical witch?
Well, she's like the old visitor who comes in and apparently is very suffocating energetically and kind of hovers around the bed. And from what I'm told, and I'm not sure, but are you familiar with that at all or no?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the woman, like the seamstress, like she could be viewed as that. But I think that she was, I liked her. She wasn't oppressive to me at all.
Right. And I think a lot of spirits are like that. I think they come and go like ebb and flow. I mean, I don't think they're really designed to harm people, in my opinion. I'm not saying all of them, but I think quite a few.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that like yeah, I mean, that's and I had a dream like there was the one woman, it was like Flowers for the Dead, that she kept appearing in my dream. She was kind of like that too, kind of like the Snow White, the woman, that kind of figure, like not Snow White herself, but the Wicked Witch in Snow White.
That's not very appealing.
Kind of looked like her. So I don't know if that's the one you were talking about.
Yeah, something like that. Well, from what I've been, listening to and hearing from other people, it's usually something that looks unattractive and just kind of old and raggedy and, ominous and not necessarily light oriented. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my story, like I would want to ask her, like talk to her, instead of not being afraid of her.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think communication is really big,
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's the problem with a lot of people is they interpolate things incorrectly a lot of the times, and like you were mentioning that one person that they said was over there when technically speaking it doesn't make sense that she would have even been there, that spirit. So, things like that, you have to kind of ask, was it, are they channeling something wrong? Is it an entity that's tricking them and pretending to be that unit? You know what I mean?
Right. And yeah, for me, I rely heavily on other people as well, because I think that there are people that are more well versed with this stuff. So I don't necessarily always, like every location that I feature in my books, I go into pretty much most of the locations, but if it's a location that scares me and I kind of know those locations before I go in, I'll rely on other people's experiences to kind of tell the story.
Right. Well, I think that's a good idea. So let's talk a little bit about you said there were various types of haunts. You kind of touched on those in your book, I believe. So what exactly is a crime haunt, for example, or an overnight haunt? Can you elaborate a little on those?
Well, I mean, I broke it up in chapters, and like that was going to get a crime haunt, is where a location in Salem and these are all location specific. Mm-hmm. Crime haunt is where a crime occurred. For example, the one that interests me, it's like the murder house in Salem. It's slipping what the name of what was inspired for the movie Clue, supposedly, because the Parker Brothers had a place there. But that house there was a Joseph White, Captain White was murdered in the house on the second floor, and there's supposedly a residual haunting in the house. Mm-hmm. On the second floor that replays I guess apparently ghosts have calendars, because supposedly it appears on the day he was murdered every year. And I was actually at the house where he was murdered the same day, and I didn't see anything, but I do think that there's definitely energy there.
Mm-hmm. So that would make sense. A certain time and the illusion of, yeah. And I have we have a question here from the chat from Karen K, and she'd like to know if you ever help ghosts cross over.
Yeah, I let people. For example, the woman the seamstress that was in the house, she was very Catholic, so I actually have a priest friend who didn't necessarily believe what was going on, but basically you can go now kind of. So I have done that, but it not necessarily. I let other people do it for me.
Mm-hmm. Right, delegate. Huh?
Yeah, I delegate to the people, because I felt she was very Catholic, and she was like diehard Catholic, so I felt like she wanted to communicate with a priest.
Right. Well, yeah, they have a resonance with that certain particular being. That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. And how many of these haunts do you think are speculative folklore versus a true haunting? Now, I know there's a historical blueprint behind it all, but is any of this folklore?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's folklore. I mean, mm-hmm. I think the Lady in Black on George's Island, I think every time I've tried to debunk that story, because I know the sort of the origins of it, that is definitely folklore. Doesn't mean that George's Island isn't haunted, because it was a prison for Confederate soldiers, but the actual story associated with a female being executed on the island is historically incorrect. So there's no way that the Lady in Black actually does exist. But I do think that there are soldiers still there, but they're male soldiers, or it's a male energy, not a female energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would make sense.
So I would say percentage. I try to state that in my books, like whether it's actual based on if it's folklore or if it's actual, based on people's experiences with the paranormal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Have you ever taken EVPs? Are you into that at all?
I have done that, like George's Island. I have done EVPs. I'm friends with a lot of investigators, so I use my intuition and I use sort of like my senses to do my work, and then I have done some EVPs work, but usually it's like a paranormal investigator. Like I'll say this place is haunted, and then they have all the equipment to do that. So I have, but it's very very minimal. But I did get an EVP at George's Island of breathing. And basically you need a tape recorder, a breathing, and someone saying, "Get out of here," in George's Island.
Seems like they're always saying that, aren't they?
Yeah, get out of here. That's like a recurring, like, get out of here.
It reminds me of, wasn't it one of those movies? I can't remember now, but yeah. Well, it sounds like it's just a lot of miserable entities, whatever they are. They seem very unhappy, don't they?
Well, I mean, like it was a prison, so it's like not, it's probably not a fun place to hang. It's like kind of like Alcatraz is going to attract negative energy as well. But I don't necessarily think it's a poltergeist, or if it's an entity. I think that the energy there is a residual energy.
Right.
And I think there's energy to the island too. When you come there, like I love it. And I would get my tours with the Boston Harbor Cruises and head over and spend like hours on George's Island. And I feel like that the energy, it's either welcoming or not welcoming. Like I think people either love it or hate it. And I feel like the island kind of welcomed me in spiritually. And I can feel the energy there, and I felt very comfortable there.
Well, that's good. Do you think that anybody, like say you're investigating a site or something, now, how is your psyche going? My question, I guess it's not coming out right, but literally, if some spirit tells you to get out of there, was anybody actually thinking psychically they wanted to get out of there, and that the spirit was actually pinging off of their mental body or their thoughts?
If a spirit says get out of there, I usually get out.
Okay, but I mean, if there's anybody with you who's actually thinking that, and maybe the voice is actually coming from them projecting it out, is that possible? Yeah,
I mean, like for example, like the EVP, like I have heard that before, and there was, for example, one location in Salem, it was a converted chapter of my book that it was a waterfront haunt, and it was a former like cargo ship that was turned into sort of like a marina building. And the residual haunting there was a captain that was supposedly slayed on this cargo ship, and he says, "Get out of here," too. And I think perhaps that like doppelgangers or sort of like that energy being projected, astral projection. Right. And I think that's very possible.
I think that too, because people are multidimensional, whether they realize it or not. And sometimes when they project a thought, it could bounce off on the paranormal realm and actually come back as a feedback when in fact they're actually generating the dialogue. I thought about that, several times over. So it's very fascinating. It's quite a science when you look at it, actually. So you actually come from a psychic family, right, or no?
We're a psychic family. I mean, not necessarily, but my mom is very intuitive. Like I was raised like a very intuitive family. But I definitely. My grandfather was definitely, and then my grandfather was Native American and Irish, so we definitely had that. So it is something in my backstory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good combination right there, for sure. So what do you think keeps driving you to do this research?
Again, the passion for getting history correct, and I looked at sort of when I first started doing the books, I looked at sort of my competition, and I was kind of didn't really like what I read. It was probably kind of amateurish and not really well researched, and I think it's important for me to kind of raise the bar with historical based ghost books. I think it's like I think that the genre is getting we're attracting better writers, but I think for many years there was a lot of crap. And so I think my passion is to actually do these books justice and do the stories of those who have passed, tell their stories. So I think I'm going to continue doing this until I've told all the stories I need to tell, and then maybe I'm not necessarily fiction, but maybe do something a little different.
Well, it sounds like you're definitely a good historical writer, without a doubt. So whether it takes on the form of paranormal or not, it's still about history and actually taking a snapshot of that. And I think that's important that people actually have some kind of an access to that.
Absolutely. I mean, when you were kind of mentioning before about telling kids how to, kind of giving them like sort of a guidebook to deal with the paranormal, I think that's a great idea, actually.
Well, maybe you should write one.
Yeah, that's kind of where the direction I was going, because I felt like I didn't really have that when I was a kid, and it would have been like my favorite book was that Gus Was a Friendly Ghost, which is by James Thayer, and it was about a ghost that lived in the attic, and he was your friend, and all that. And it was kind of a freaky book, but I loved that was my favorite book because that was sort of my guide when I was a kid, I felt not like a freak. So I think that would be great I don't know if I'm going to do it within the next couple of years, but I think it would be good to be able to help kids that maybe have that sensitivity or that who are also empathic as well.
Right, yeah, because there's so many children that are so very psychic. That would be a benefit for them, on so many different levels, so they don't think they're losing their minds. Because we're dealing with, I think, a more enhanced paranormal world these days.
Yeah, I think that if you see the people that go on my tours, a large percentage of the people that come on my tours, they have very powerful stories to tell. And some of them know, but some of them, I get a lot of skeptics as well. But people that go on my tours, there's some stories that I hear are just like it blow me away. So yeah, I think it definitely, I don't necessarily it's growing. I say that people are maybe, because of what's happening in pop culture, I think people are a little bit more open about their experiences now than say 5-10 years ago. Right.
Well, I grew up with, a family that always had paranormal experiences. Way back from my grandfather, great-grandfather, they've all had some kind of an interesting paranormal event. So when I look back, all of these records, there really wasn't any real record of it other than word of mouth, on a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really, really interesting. So how many of these ghosts or spirits do you think have a connection to the water, or is there a connection to the water or the sea associated with the paranormal?
That's a very good question. In my first book, we talked, there was one gentleman, Mike Baker, who is an actual scientist and paranormal researcher, who I really respect what he does because he's pretty objective when it comes to the paranormal. Mm-hmm. But he said that he actually did sort of a scientific analysis of all the alleged hotspots in the Boston area, and there was a close tie to water and also train tracks. Mm-hmm. So he did sort of like a actual scientific grid of all the different alleged haunts in Boston. Like a large percentage were associated with water.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And the train tracks, that's interesting also. So it's kind of like a direction for them maybe from the spirit realm?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, it was those were the two things that they came up, and he didn't really give any answers why that they would be conduits or why that there would be more activity by water, but that's sort of what happened. And also Boston was 75% man-made land. Mm-hmm. So this was like a lot of where we are now in Boston. It actually was underwater at one point.
Right. Yeah, that's so incredible.
Yeah, and the parts that are the most active in Boston, the 25% that was sort of like it's like hallowed ground. That's where it's the most active. Mm-hmm. Oddly.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Yeah, Boston is just a powerful place in general, I think. I like old history anyways, and I do like the old colonial energies, but yeah, I guess that's just me. But yeah. It's pretty cool. So it's good. I've been there forever, but yeah.
Well, Boston is definitely like, I've been, it's, how certain cities call you. Boston called me since I was a kid. So it was like one of those places that I've always been interested in. And like when I moved here in 1990, I've been in love with Boston. I lived in New York City for a little bit, but then I came back. And it turns out my mom did I never really did any research into my mom's, dad's, my grandfather's history. And it turns out that my family comes from this area. So I didn't know that. I didn't know that we had family from Rhode Island, which is right next to us. And it was really, it basically validated everything that I kind of felt my whole life. I felt like this was home, and I have no family here except for me. And so it just made me feel like I was at the right place.
Right, your spirit is called. Yeah, certainly sounds that way, doesn't it? Wow, I'm sure our ancestors connect in. Yeah. When you think about it, though, your ancestors, if they've transferred out already, usually they'll pull you to an area if you, usually. I've had that experience also.
Really? Because I thought it was freakish. And I'm like, what? My mom was like, why Boston? And it all kind of makes sense now. But for many years, I just knew I had to go here. Yeah. And then it just, now that I know that I have family that goes back to the 1600s, 1700s here, makes a lot of sense.
Wow, and then you're also kind of telling their story indirectly when you think about it, aren't you?
Yeah, my mom and I both don't like to fly, and she's actually coming up to visit I got the history book from my mother, so we're both going to do more research on our family and go to the cemetery in Rhode Island where our ancestors are buried and all that. So I'm kind of excited to do that project with my mom.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you should go back. Have you done your lineage and your family tree?
Yeah, I mean, we had a block for many years. We didn't really know my mom's dad, my grandfather's side, because he died so young, and we didn't have any family members. My mom connected with my aunt who just passed away recently, and connected with her, and we actually got the information we needed. And yeah, thanks to Ancestry.com, we were able to go all the way back to the 1600s.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, that's the one we use. Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, when you start accessing ancient ancestors, it's phenomenal.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
And it was definitely one of those things that people ask me, like, where did you come from? Like, I didn't know for many years. And then when I got the history thing from my mom. So when she got the Ancestry.com subscription, she has a whole book and everything associated to our family history. So it's kind of interesting.
Oh, it sounds great. Yeah, I think that's nice. And you get a nice record going there for sure. And then you can kind of correlate to see if there were any hauntings associated maybe with the name or the lineage even.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to go to Rhode Island, but there's a location, there's a house there that's still standing from the 1600s. It's a farm in Rhode Island that was my great, like it goes all the way back to the 1600s. It's called the Lawton House that we're going to probably go and visit and see. It's probably haunted.
Wow, no kidding. Yeah, it probably is. You'll have to keep us posted then on that one for sure. So for our listeners who have maybe not experienced a haunting, what do you think are some good things to look at insofar as maybe a possible haunting in one's home?
I try to stay away from residential hauntings, but I think that for me, from my personal experiences with having my house haunted, not all energy is negative. So I think that you have to look at it. I would say probably just like people, it's like 70. For the most part, my experiences with energies have been pretty positive, actually. Mm-hmm. So I guess the first thing is don't be afraid, and don't automatically assume it's going to be like paranormal activity and that the spirits are going to be attacking you or negative. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the signs for haunting, for me, opening and closing doors. Every place is different. It could be also like audible. You can hear noises. Footsteps is a very common occurrence. And usually it's like, what's weird, if you have the audible, like it could be scents as well. It could be like a perfume or cigar smoke. If you have sort of like the audible sounds, you rarely see an apparition. So it's either or. Right.
That makes sense. Yeah. Very interesting. I've heard that also with the scents as well. Certain people are associated with certain smells, like roses or cigars. I've heard that with spirits.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, like, people tell me their stories, and it's their loved ones like visiting them. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think they're trapped there. I think they're just kind of stopping by to kind of let them know that they're there, and then they leave.
Right, and especially if perhaps someone's been thinking about them, then of course that might summon them on a nice gentle level where they just connect in real quick and poke their head in and leave.
Yeah, I think my grandfather's that example. I mean, I don't necessarily think he's bound on Earth, but I think he does visit. Mm-hmm. And he comes to my dreams not as much recently, but he did for many years. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's just trying to check in, see how everyone's doing and how I'm doing.
I think that's great. That's kind of nice. So what times, are there any times in specific that hauntings occur, nighttime versus daytime? Have you noticed at all?
That's a good, I mean, obviously I'm more of a nocturnal person. Yeah, we've had hauntings daytime, but George's Island, you have to go during the day. So all my investigation or my work at George's Island has been during the day. Mm-hmm. And we've had the EVP app, and it was during the day. The girl that was found at Central Burying Ground, or not found, but the spirit that haunts her, she appears during the day. So I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be night or day. Mm-hmm. We have examples. Obviously, people at 3 a.m, it's obviously more active because people, I guess, are tired. Mm-hmm. But I think that you hear more about nighttime hauntings. But I've had experiences featured in my books that they're happening during the day as well.
Yeah, that would make sense also. Do you ever notice a pattern insofar as the areas with these hauntings? I know on a historical level, some of these places were very traumatic. What about, was there anything that you noticed that was similar from place to place? A connection from point A to point B or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like the broken glass. I mean, like I think that's something that for me, no one told me this, but like if someone says we've heard broken glass, the first thing I look into is the history. Perhaps there may be a fire at the location, and generally 95% of the time there was a horrific fire that destroyed the location. So like that's been kind of a recurring motif in my work. Yeah, I mean there's always like every city has sort of like their archetypes. There's always like the ghost guy of every city. There's always like one. Usually it's a guy that kind of does what I'm doing. And in Salem, it was Bob Cahill. He passed a few years back. There's always like one person that kind of does what I do, and I feel kind of like it's a calling that I'm the next person to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think that I definitely do see kind of recurring themes, and there's always like the Lady in Black is a very common theme. There's Lady in White. I think we kind of use sort of metaphors or sort of the motifs to kind of make sense of what we see.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, when I think of the glass getting shattered, to me it reminds me of breaking up energy too. You know? Yeah,
I mean, someone actually, I posted on Facebook, and my friend who I think she's very psychic. She was saying like usually I associate broken glass with something positive, and I'm like, maybe it is like maybe it's like I think like if you're having a wedding or something, that could be positive, or it's like a new adventure. But for me, at that location specifically, it's been negative. I mean,
yeah, you can kind of get the vibe, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like there was like the last time it happened, and we had glasses on our table, and the board literally kind of like mysteriously dropped onto our table and broke our glass. Like that's not positive.
Yeah, there's something going on there with that for sure.
And then they took the pizza and they put the pizza on top of the glass. I'm like, what? And then we had a broken glass and you put a pizza on top of the glass. So I probably will not be eating there anymore.
Yeah, I don't think I would do that either. That's not real healthy now, is it? Jeez. Hey, have you come across any ghosts of animals, any spirits of animals?
That's weird that you say that, because I actually, that was probably the next, like I have a couple of books I'm kind of in my mind for the future, and one would be animal spirits. I definitely, Boston, because of the Revolutionary War history, we have a lot of horse ghosts. Like horse spirits, like the Old South Meeting House supposedly is haunted by a horse. We call him Crazy Horse on Peddix Island, who he appears. There's like a barn, there's a stable that people have experienced this horse spirit, and usually it's a full-bodied apparition of a horse, and then it's also the smell of hay, and then you can hear like a neighing, which is the case at Old South Meeting House. So yeah, and cats all over. Salem has so many ghost cats. It's like every location has a ghost cat.
Really? Wow, that's fascinating. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there were a lot of cats. I mean, like Giles Corey, for example, he loved cats, and so did Nathaniel Hawthorne. So I think that the ghost cats are probably related to just like the ghost dogs or ghosts, just like people. I think that they left a psychic imprint on Salem.
Right. Well, they're also familiars too. I mean, usually for the witch. I thought that was that's kind of interesting that there are a bunch of ghost cats wandering around. It makes you wonder what they're looking for to some degree. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, the ghosts, like it's weird, but I mean, I didn't want to say that, but like, yeah, I mean, like with Salem, the ghosts, the cats were definitely very prevalent. Like it happened. Like there was a liquor store called the Bunghole that they had a ghost cat sighting. And there's a bread and breakfast that has a ghost cat too. So it was very, very, very common in Salem. In Boston, it's more horses. So and that would make sense with the Revolutionary War, and there were a lot of horses during the 1700s. So
yeah. What about dogs? Any dog stories of spirits?
Yeah, I mean, there's ones that dogs are not as common as cats or horses. And I'm not saying that dogs are not intelligent, but there was one. There's been a few dog spirits, but it's mainly been for me, from my experience, it's been cats and horses.
That's fascinating. Wow, that's really, really interesting. Makes you wonder where they're buried, to some degree. When you think about things like that, like the horse, for example. Has anybody ever tried to find the burial of the animal?
Well, I think that, what happened with horses, that when they passed, they were brought into horse rendering plants. So I think actually one of the islands served as a horse rendering plant, which is Spectacle Island. So probably the horse was rendered on Spectacle Island.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
Wild. Yeah, that would explain a lot right there. It's really amazing. That's just one little piece of history you're capturing. And we have a big world we're on right now. Can you imagine every place else across the globe?
Yeah, it's like it's like sort of like the islands were everything that Boston didn't want to see. That's where it all happened. So there was like houses of ill repute on those islands. There were orphanages. There were asylums. There were camps for Native Americans. There were horse rendering plants. Like all this stuff happened on the islands, and that offers for a very intense paranormal history. And pirates, they were gibbeted, which is putting these really crude contraptions on Nix's Mate, which is one of the islands in Boston Harbor, as cautionary tales. So a lot of bad happened out there, and there's not all of it was bad. The islands are beautiful. So some people had positive experiences as well out there, but I think there were a lot of stories to be told that need to be told.
I agree. What about the ghosts of pirates? I know you touched a little bit on that. Is there any real pronounced spirits of ghosts?
Yeah. Well, I told you, I did the tours in Boston Harbor, and there's an island called Nix's Mate, and Nix's Mate was where the pirates were gibbeted. So they were put into these cruise contraptions and hung by one foot upside down, and used as cautionary tales to ward off other pirates. And so there have been reports of like a raucous laughter coming from Nix's Mate. And what's weird, every time I pass by Nix's Mate to go to George's Island on the boat, I was on my chair and I felt like I was pushed. Not to say that the pirate pushed me, but that area was very active for me, heading to George's Island. So I think that, yes, we do have that pirate ghost, and every city has a pirate ghost story, but there's also a ghost story associated with King's Chapel, which there's a cemetery in Boston where a pirate actually was, instead of being buried on Nix's Mate, he was buried at King's Chapel Cemetery, and it's supposed that he still haunts that location too.
That's pretty interesting. Is there any word on ghost ships at all?
Yeah, it's really you say that. We definitely have. We saw there's been a sighting of what looks like a sort of a kind of like the USS Constitution. And by the way, the USS Constitution is haunted too. And that was in my first book, and it's going to be featured again in my next book. But yeah, there's a ghost frigate, which is a 3-masted wood-hulled boat that's been spotted over the years. And we think it's perhaps the Somerset, which is the British vessel that destroyed everything in the harbor on March 17, 1776. It was a very aggressive British vessel that eventually sank right near Provincetown. So people suspect that it's the Somerset, but people have described it looks to me like it's like a 17, like probably the 18th century, 17th century frigate.
Wow. When did they see this ship?
Well, the reports have been there was like 2 gentlemen that reported seeing the frigate at night, and they were fishing. And it goes back to the 1600s. This ghost boat has been spotted for 3 centuries.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like stuff like that. I like old ghost ships. Too bad they didn't get on board, right? I'm sure they wouldn't want to.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, I think it's a positive thing. It's not necessarily negative. But the first sighting in Massachusetts, ghost sighting was actually in Boston Harbor. There was what looked like orbs coming out of the harbor waters, and according to 2 gentlemen who were in their fishing boat, the orbs came up and formed a person, as the shape of a person, and he said, come with me, like the spirit, whatever that was, said, come with me, and they, of course, fled. But that was in the 1600s. So the first ghost sighting in America was in Boston Harbor.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It is when you think about it. I mean, how far it goes back. And then, of course, there's the other anomaly with UFOs and everything else. So what about the USS Constitution? What kind of sightings have they had there?
Well, actually, I was told that Ghost Hunters is actually going to do an investigation there, and Navy owns it, so it's the oldest continuously operating naval vessel afloat. So it has a lot of history. It's known as Old Ironsides. It survived many years of pirates and battles and War of 1812. It's called Old Ironsides because it actually it's wooden holds, but it actually would the cannonballs would kind of like ricochet from the vessel. Now, when I went there, I actually visited a couple of weeks ago. It's going on a 3-year hiatus to be restored. But I talked to people on board, and I'm like, what kind of experiences have you had? And they're like, it's definitely haunted. I'm like, well, what kind of experiences? Like, there's reports of a rocking chair moving back and forth. There are cannonballs that move sort of mysteriously on board. There's been reports of like sort of a shadow figure wearing military type garb. And people think that it's probably really the captain dating back to the 1800s who haunts it. And there was also, the guy that I talked to, he actually said that the haunting, they're not enemies. They're actually people that were on board and they died on board. So there was one gentleman who was watching guard of the USS Constitution. He actually was killed by the captain for sleeping while he was on duty, and he was blown into smithereens in the cannon for falling asleep while being on duty.
Oh,
so we think that he's the one haunting the place.
Yeah.
And during the 1800s, actually, there was a boy who was on board. He served as a surgeon. When he died, and they think that it was a kid ghost as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's amazing. And you know what, Sam? We're almost out of time here. I can't believe it. It's flown by. I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. This has been awesome to have you on. And I want to have you come back soon and let us know what you've been up to when you finish your next book. I know you're going to be cranking that one out soon. And I do want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I hope you appreciate the information that Sam presented. And also stay tuned for Shiny Side Up with David Dudger and Becky coming up next to sell you into the night from down under, of course. And let's see here. We've got a few minutes here, plus or minuses. Once again, let's give everybody a rundown on your website and how they can access your books.
Yeah, it's bostonhaunts.com. It's BOSTONHAUNTS.com, CambridgeHaunts.com, or hauntedbostonharbor.com.
Excellent. And if people have ghost stories they want to share, can they email you?
Absolutely. Email me at info@cambridgehaunts.com.
Very good. Excellent. And I think I touched on this off air a little bit, but are you planning on doing any type of documentary or any kind of film down the road?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I'm interested in doing a couple of bites when it comes to television. And if I did actually do something, I would want to be not necessarily on camera, but behind the scenes doing the research. So possibly, but not in the immediate future.
Okay. And so I know you're working on a book right now. You want to talk a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, it's Haunted Boston Harbor is my next book. So a lot of the stuff we talked about tonight is going to be featured in the next book, and then the book after that is Haunted Provincetown. So I'm doing Provincetown is book 5.
Wow, when do you think that one's going to be out?
2016.
That's awesome. Yeah, so you have deadlines and you're just cranking.
Yeah.
That's really good. Awesome. So you obviously we talked about you're a little bit empathic here. You have a lot of empathic abilities and also very psychic. And, of course, that seems to kind of been bled through your ancestry, as we were discussing a little bit here. So what does your mom think about all the work you're doing right now with this realm of the spirit world?
She's really supportive. I mean, my mom, she always recounts her experiences because I came on in November and we talked a little bit about like my experiences, and she had experiences as well. So my mom is very proud of me and very supportive, and she's not necessarily as supportive as anyone could be, and she's not necessarily against it. She actually believes what I say, which is not the case with all my friends.
Well,
because my mom has actually had experiences, and she's like, oh yeah, me too. So she understands what I'm going through.
Right. Well, a lot of people have had experiences. My goodness, I think a great portion of people across the board here on this planet have had many paranormal experiences, without a doubt. So do you ever get the feeling you need a break from the world of spirits and ghosts?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I kind of turn it on and off. So I took a break around Christmas. I focused on Santa Claus and that whole time. I call it my ghost break. But then I kind of get back into it. I've already I'm already working on the book now. So for Haunted Boston Harbor, and I'm so passionate about the history that that I have to turn on the ghost stuff, and to be able to really get the true story.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And have you noticed any what I call dead zones in Salem or near or around Salem where there's just no activity at all? It's just like a void?
Yeah, I mean, Boston especially. Like Boston, the dead zones would be most of Boston. I mean, like there's the hallowed ground area that was there before it was filled in with dirt from the hills. But if you go into the areas that the hallowed ground is very active, but you go into like Back Bay or the areas that that were filled in, they're all dead zones. So it's interesting that the most active areas paranormally in Boston were was the land that existed there before the 1800s.
Well, that's very, very interesting. So do you have any idea as far as what do you think might be happening over there with the dead zones?
I think because it was water. I mean, I think that it was like they filled it in, so it's sort of like there's not the history there to kind of like linger. But yeah, I don't necessarily know why it would be, except for that it's not that it was filled in. That's man-made land.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, how would you handle a hostile spirit for somebody who's encountered maybe a spirit? Oh gosh, we're out of time. All right, you guys, we'll have to do this again. Thank you again, Sam. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great week. Yeah, it's been great to have you on. Thanks very much. Talk to you soon, everybody. Take care, Sam.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution.